Alright, hello and welcome to the first and what may be only Dynasty offseason team review. I'm going to take a look at a couple of my teams and see what to do with them during this upcoming offseason, as well as if I have time or if this goes a little quicker than I'm expecting, I'll maybe take a look at a couple from the Dynasty FF Reddit sub. But this is a team in a 12-team PPR league. We just had our first season, so it was the inaugural season. This team ended up leading the league in points and did very well. It was drafted as a year one punt, so I was not even targeting 2015 as a competitive season. I think I expected to get somewhere between 6th and 8th place in the league, but because of Dion Lewis and Gary Barnidge in particular, off the waiver wire, it became a very, very successful season. The team has a very low average age. Like I said, I drafted it to be a young a punt team. So you draft to amass talent, basically best player available for the first 8 to 10 rounds, and go from there. But I'll just go down position by position, kind of outline the team. My methodology here is fairly simple. You basically separate out each player from each position. I like to include their age on these if it's for my own team. It gives you an idea just what you're working with. Don't pay too much attention to average age. It's kind of misleading. 24 isn't that much different than 26 versus 27, etc. And certain key veterans, in this case, Gary Barnidge and Tim Hightower, I mean, technically they're dragging the average age up, closer to 30, but they're also key members of a playoff team. So just to go through the team a little bit, at quarterback there's 3 players, Mariota, Cousins, and Smith. I don't like carrying 3 quarterbacks. As you'll see with the next team, I like to carry 1 quarterback. But if I'm going to be running a committee, then this group was just fine for me. Alex Smith did not provide much value, but he provided some value, and he was the original backup quarterback. Kirk Cousins was on and off the team twice via waivers. Picked him up early, dropped him in the middle of the season, and then picked him up again. He ended up being another key piece to a championship run. But of this group, players highlighted in yellow, this orange color, whatever you want to call it, they're players that are on the chopping block if I need to make room for waiver additions. If something important happens during the off season, I can add a player. But they're behind these red players. The red ones are the easy cuts. Also, if I have to activate anybody off of IR, they're the players that I'll be looking to cut. So Alex Smith on the chopping block, but at the same time, I'd rather keep him than cut him. So it would take a 3rd or 4th round pick to move him, as far as I'm concerned. These valuations here, they are basically, I think of it as a starting point for negotiations. I would not be looking to acquire a 1st round pick from Mariota, or I would not be willing to buy Mariota for a 1st round pick. But if someone want to buy him from me for a 1st round pick, I think I would at least I'd be listening. Same with Kirk Cousins. Yeah, I don't think you could ever get a high second for him, but his play has been good enough that I would take a high second for me to move him, and I'd take a 3rd round pick for Alex Smith. No, nothing too exciting here. Running back, this is a little more exciting. I have a what I call a stud player, anyone that's drafted in the 1st round or 2 of startup drafts. Not necessarily a 4 1st round pick guy, but 2, 3, 4 1st round picks to move one of these guys. David Johnson highlights the group, although he was a late season acquisition. I traded away 2 1st round picks for him and a 2nd round pick. Behind David Johnson, TJ Yeldon and Jeremy Langford. I consider Yeldon kind of on a tier of his own here between David Johnson and Jeremy Langford. Langford, he needs Forte to move, but if Forte does move, then Langford I think becomes an RB1 by default. And even with Forte in the mix, I think he's an RB3 with RB2 upside. We saw this past season. He performed just about that well and had a great stretch in the middle of the season for RB1 numbers. And behind those 2, I have Carlos Williams, Charles Sims, and Dion Lewis. These 3 guys, I think they're all worth approximately a late 1st. I like Dion Lewis the best of the 3. Charles Sims kind of has the highest potential upside if Doug Martin somehow leaves. I don't expect him to, but he might. And then Carlos Williams, he's performed very well. I think he's performed over his head, and I'd rather cash out now while I can. His concussions scare the crap out of me, and he is still a 2nd-string running back for at least 1 more season behind LaShawn McCoy. But these green players are the ones that I will be looking to actively shop. They're players whose values exceeds their current utility to my team. In which case, these guys don't do me much good on my bench. I only need 2, maybe 3 running backs to start in any given week. So anything beyond, the number 3, 4, 5 guy, they really should be actively shopped. And I would be shopping both of these. And then behind those, I have some stashes or waiver wire guys. Zach Zenner is he's probably a hold at this point. At least we see him get back on the field this upcoming preseason. And then Denard Robinson was a late season acquisition that does not have much value as far as I'm concerned. Tim Hightower, same deal, only off the waiver wire instead. So of this group, Hightower is an obvious cut if I have to. He'll be the first cut or the second cut to make room for my draft picks, probably just one draft pick. And then Denard Robinson is in the same realm as Alex Smith, Jeff Janis, and Jared Abbrederis, depending on what happens during this offseason with the Packers guys. And then at tight end, very simple. Safarian Jenkins, Gary Barnidge. For mid first for Safarian Jenkins, high second for Barnidge. Probably exceeds their perceived value, so I'll be holding both of them. Safarian Jenkins hasn't been healthy enough to rely on him, and Barnidge is too old and unproven to rely on him, so I'm going to probably carry both of these into the upcoming season. And then at wide receiver, you can see this is the strength of the team. This is where going best player available in the draft really pays off. While I was able to get late round guys at running back like Yeldon, mid to late round, Yeldon, Langford, Carlos Williams, Charles Sims, etc., it required a lot of draft capital to pick up this group right here. Hopkins, Robinson, and Watkins were my first, second, and third round picks during the offseason, and all three are first round starter picks in this current offseason. Moncrief was a mid round pick. Same with Devontae Parker. I think he was a fourth round pick, and Josh Gordon was surprisingly an 18th or 19th round pick. All three of these guys should command a high price this upcoming offseason, and all three, I guess I could consider moving all three. Josh Gordon is the one I'm most likely to move because I think if he hits the ground running this preseason and early in this upcoming season, he's a guy that I'll be looking to cash out at peak value of a second or third round startup pick guy or higher if possible. And if I can't find a buyer at those prices, I'll just hold on to him and ride that out as long as possible. Devontae Adams has been a huge disappointment this past season. I think it takes a few big games in the playoffs, which may not happen, or a different role this upcoming season before I'll be able to move him at fair value. Otherwise, he's probably a guy that as this green is going to turn to yellow, which is going to turn to red. He's going to eventually be dropped unless he turns things around. DeAndre Smelter is one of my favorite prospects at the moment, so he's not being moved. The two Chiefs guys, I'm probably going to be holding them into the offseason, through the offseason. There may be someone who's looking to take a chance on one of them at if I can find a mid or a high second round buyer, I'll move them in an instant. As it stands, I think Conley's a better prospect than Wilson, but they're both a little bit deflated due to the overall situation in Kansas City. And Rashad Green, I probably should consider shopping him as well. Whereas these three guys, they're close to waiver wire material. Abbrederis has been on the waiver wire off and on this season, same with Taylor Gabriel, and Jeff Janis has just been lackluster. But I'm not looking forward to getting rid of any of this group, to be honest with you. This team is very, very strong all around. The obvious points of weakness, you can say tight end is a potential point of weakness, and quarterback is a potential point of weakness. You can also say that at the running back position, there's just a lot of unproven guys. These were all rookies in 2015, and Charles Sims was a rookie in 2014. So we have four guys that are basically 16 games or fewer into their career, and when it comes to players like that, they can go up or down in a hurry. So when you're looking at what to take this team in the offseason, you see my one draft pick of note is a 2.08. I also have a late second round pick, hopefully a late second round pick in the 2017 draft, and then the third, fourth, and fifth round picks. With a team this high quality, the third, fourth, fifth round picks are often not going to even make it onto the team. In this case, I would consider drafting my 5.12, but I would also consider holding one of those two cuts, depending on what happens with my injured reserve players. But all that being said, taking a chance on a tight end in the draft is not what I'm looking to do. I have two guys. I have plenty of capital invested into the position. I just don't have I don't have a guy that I will bank on for TE1 production this upcoming season. I think Austin Seferian-Jenkins is a fair bet for TE1, but it would probably be the mid to late TE1 ranks. A guy like Rob Gronkowski, Jordan Reed, Tyler Eifert, one of those would be a marquee addition on this team and would improve this team, but I don't think that's a direction I want to take. Similarly, I don't want to be drafting a tight end here in the second round. Tight ends are notoriously slow to develop. They're a very difficult position to draft to begin with. One, because it seems like there's a high variance in terms of how they turn out. First round tight ends generally seem pretty safe. First round NFL draft tight ends are relatively safe. And we're seeing that with a number of them. But sometimes relatively safe just means they put up tight end 12, tight end 14 numbers, and you call that a decent day. Um, in the second round, I'll most likely be looking at a running back. My second choice would be a best available wide receiver if one of the late first, early second round guys somehow falls to 2.08. I probably will not be looking at a quarterback. I think I have two guys with quarterback one upside and two dynasty quarterback ones, and I have a third quarterback on the roster already. So best case scenario, a guy at 2.08 becomes a guy like Alex Smith, and that's just not what I'm looking for. So I think my plan here is pretty simple. Mostly just sit tight, look to draft a running back. If I find the right buyer for Josh Gordon, perhaps I can turn him into a guy like Gronkowski or Jordan Reed in a first round pick or something along those lines. Maybe I'll be inclined to make a move like that. Otherwise, I'll be shopping these running backs for first round draft picks in 2016 or 2017. One of the benefits about taking 2017 picks at the moment, obviously, pundits say it's going to be a relatively strong draft class, so it's obviously something to like. But this far out, it's possible to really bank on that. But what taking capital in 2017 does is it lets me basically use an extra roster spot in the meantime. So I would get an extra 12 months. If, for example, I traded Carlos Williams for a first round pick in 2016, I'd have to use that roster spot on whoever I draft in 2016. And by the time it gets to 2017, that player may have busted. They may have, panned out. But in either case, I have to factor in the cost of that roster spot into that acquisition there. However, when I acquire a 2017 pick for Carlos Williams, I can go ahead and add one of these players off my free agent watch list. I've blurred them out just because I know I have players in this league that read the subreddit. They shouldn't be that hard to figure out, but either way, if I lose a guy off my roster, I get to pick up a guy off this watch list, or I get to drop one fewer guy when I have to promote my injured reserved. Either way, I get to table that decision as far as what to do with that draft pick until 2017. So not only are you getting a pick in a strong draft class, but you do have a slightly added utility of an extra roster spot for the next 12 months. So that's that team. But this is a relatively easy team. It's just a 12-team league, offense only, relatively well endowed team from top to bottom. But what about a different situation? Here's a slightly more complex team. This is a 14-team PPR league with IDP starters, relatively tackle heavy, but fairly balanced overall. This team is also a playoff team. It didn't quite lead the league in points, but it came close, regular season-wise anyway. It starts one defensive tackle, two defensive ends, three linebackers, one cornerback, and two defensive backs. It also starts one quarterback, minimum of one tight end, two wide receivers, and one running back, and then up to, I think, 7 skill position players, so a lot of flex players available. It's also a slight tight end premium. And all that said, this is the team. If you'll notice, there are a lot of players highlighted in red. Scott Chandler is an easy cut. Joique Bell is an easy cut. And Jasper Brinkley is an easy cut. And then when you get to the defensive backs, most of them are easy cuts. Let's be honest here. Defensive backs in general are relatively low leverage in Dynasty. Cornerbacks, then you only start one cornerback in this league, so anything past the cornerback 2 or cornerback 3, and even then sometimes all cornerbacks are virtually obvious cuts in the offseason. Even a guy like Jason Verrett, who had a very, very strong season, especially the middle portions of the season. Even as a rookie, he's an easy cut. Marcus Peters is probably a cut in this format. Same with Josh Norman and Prince Amukamara. But those are the kind of guys that it would take before I would consider keeping even a single cornerback on the roster. And then with Mike Adams and Chris Conte, you either have a strong IDP who is old or a weak IDP who is young. Both of them are easy cuts. And then going through this team, you notice there is this was a team that was started as a 2014 punt. This was drafted 2 seasons ago. However, after getting DeAndre Hopkins in the 3rd round, Alshon Jeffrey in the 1st round, Sammy Watkins in the 2nd round, and Odell Beckham in the 5th round, this team took off in a hurry. It made the playoffs its inaugural season behind a breakout season from Jeremy Hill and those wide receivers. And coming into this past season, I found myself in a position where I was interested in buying a few IDP studs and making a deep playoff run. Unfortunately, the studs I ended up buying were I purchased. Where is he? Bobby Wagner, who was solid, but his cost exceeded his value. Still, he was a very important piece in a playoff run. I purchased Jason Pierre-Paul before his injury. That turned out to be a dud, although the price was right back in the day. And then I made a creative trade for Demario Davis, and he definitely did not pan out, although I have hopes going forward. All that being said, the team ended up finishing very strong, largely on the back of Dion Lewis. He was a very, very important early season play, and then obviously Russell Wilson performed extraordinarily well down the stretch, and the wide receivers came together for a few games in a row of very, very strong production. But this team has a few very, very glaring weaknesses. If you look at the tight end position, again, this is much worse than the other team that I just showed. Scott Chandler has very little future value. Ben Watson is a free agent and could have very little future value. They're both north of 30. Antonio Gates is a free agent, and while he has hinted that he is coming back this upcoming season, or is probably coming back this upcoming season, he'll be almost 36 when the season kicks off, and he'll turn 36 well into the season. And so that's not a position where I will feel very comfortable with the position. Dwayne Allen, I believe, is also a free agent, and he was hot garbage this past season. I acquired him for Kendall Wright before this past season, thinking that it would set me up pretty well at tight end going forward. Get a high tight end 2, low tight end 1 kind of player, and he was anything but. And then Jason Morrow's hardly played his first 2 seasons. I guess his rookie season he played a fair amount, but was not very productive. And so while he is young and has tight end 1, maybe tight end 2 upside, he's shown nothing of the sort thus far. And then at running back, it's highlighted by Charles Sims and Dion Lewis, since Jeremy Hill has been so lackluster. Although the 3 of these are probably good enough to be considered dynasty RB1s or RB2s. Whereas Justin Forsett, Sean Drone, Brandon Bold, and Tim Hightower, even though these guys were great this past season, and Forsett, I guess, has future upside if he continues in Baltimore like he should, all 5 of these guys are relatively weak. So again, like the last team, running back is going to be a point of emphasis during the offseason. As you can see, I've listed the 2.03. My target will probably be a running back. That seems to be a sweet spot where you can get a guy this past offseason would have been someone like David Johnson, Carlos Williams. You could have grabbed Matt Jones. You could have gotten guys like Jeremy Hill the previous season, much later than that even. But that's the kind of guy that I'll be looking to take with that 2.03, hopefully. Otherwise, the best player available is always a good fallback that early in the draft. At wide receiver, highlighted by 5 very, very good players, 4 studs and 1 guy, John Brown. I think I like him better than consensus. He's a guy I'm not going to be looking to sell until at least 1 more season. I have a number of stashes here that really aren't all that good. Guys like Albert Wilson or Devontae Adams do have future wide receiver 2 upside if things break right for them, but they're probably 5% shots at best at this point. Same with Rashad Green, maybe even a little bit less likely for him. Danny Amendola, he had spot starter value this past season and may this next season, but I would not be looking to hold on to him for any meaningful stretch of time. And Paul Richardson, he's had his chances and just can't stay healthy. So these are guys that I'd be looking to deal this offseason if I find buyers at fair value. Looking at the IDPs, defensive tackle, you got a couple of guys here that K'Wan Short was an MVP this past season, fantasy MVP. But defensive tackles are probably too difficult to move, and his value definitely exceeds his trade value. So I'll be keeping him. Michael Brockers, that defensive line is stacked, but he's been outshined by Aaron Donald. No shame for that, but it's definitely not a place where I'd be looking to keep him on my team long term. We'll see what happens over the next 3-4 months and go from there, but he's on the chopping block. At defensive end, I have 2 guys that should be DE1s going forward, and 2 guys that have DE1 upside in Frank Clark and Coney Eagley. Both are very young players, and both should be very good. So I would be treating my defensive end position as a position of strength going forward. As such, I think it gives me the freedom to shop around Dion Jordan if anyone feels like buying. But it also lets me, wait and see wait for him to hit the field and see if he has any sort of potential. Since I do have so much strength at the position, so I'm now, in no hurry to move him, but I would like to free up that roster spot since it's been a complete dud the past 32 games. And then Derek Shelby, just a late season acquisition off the waiver wire. I guess depending on what happens with Olivier Vernon and Cameron Wake, I'm not sure if there's much room for him on that defensive line, but he was decent this past season after, I guess it was after Wake went down. Then at linebacker, I've got one linebacker, and I guess two LB1s in Dynasty. Jordan Hicks, who could be an LB1 by this time next season, and then a bunch of guys that are LB2, LB3 level. So I feel like linebacker is a decent position going forward. I would like a little more depth, hence why the fourth round pick is penciled in to be a linebacker, depending on what's available on the board. That could be a guy that last year was Jordan Hicks. It's usually one of either the less polished or the less desirable situational linebackers. The ones like Stephon Anthony that come into the league with a good situation tend to be scooped up pretty early. Eric Kendricks, same thing. But that'll be either best player available or a linebacker or a running back in the fourth round. And then a guy, Wesley Woodyard. I mean, I guess I'll shop him. I mean, he was a waiver wire acquisition midseason, and he provided some great spot starts, but his age is exceeding his expiration date. And then Zach Brown, he was drafted in the startup draft, but has yet to really pan out. I guess he's been okay at times, LB3 level, but not much more than that. And then Jasper Brinkley, just old villain. DB, touched on this earlier, they're basically all cut worthy. Will Allen was just bad on the field, so he's always at a risk to lose his job. And at 33, he just doesn't hold much standalone value. In fact, let me go ahead and update this to bad. I'm going to go ahead and cut him for the first worthy guy when free agency opens up. And then Bradley McDougald, I'd probably keep him if I cut the other four guys. But mediocre. I mean, you could probably stream and approach or exceed his production. The only other interesting thing of note, I'm only carrying one quarterback. I think that's fine. When you have a QB1, a guy like Andrew Luck, Aaron Rodgers, Cam Newton, Russell Wilson, I don't think you need to carry a QB2 in the offseason. I mean, if you have a guy with too much value to drop, like if you have Blake Bortles, or if you have Derek Carr, or if you have Tyrod Taylor, if you picked up any of those guys in the last couple of seasons, like sure, keep them. Don't sell them for nothing. Don't drop them. But this was a team that my original backup quarterback, the second quarterback I drafted, I guess. So I don't really like using backups. The second quarterback I drafted in the startup was Geno Smith. And there's been no reason to hold on to him or to switch out for a Zach Mettenberger type or Kirk Cousins. I kind of passed up on him. That may be the one that comes back to bite me. But either way, I can deal with the bye week issue when the bye week gets here, and I can deal with an injury if or when it happens. In the meantime, Russell Wilson will probably not be sat for anybody in the league that I could acquire, so there's really no reason to keep a backup at this point. As far as what to do going forward, I think this team, it's a little more open-ended than the previous team. This team has, because of the roster size, 48 players instead of 28. It has the IDP instead of just offense only. I think it's a little more open-ended. I think I am set with the running back position. I have enough capital invested into it, and this league only needs you to start one minimum. So I prefer to avoid investing into the running back position. I would like to continue churning these wide receivers, maybe find a good buy low candidate, a guy like a Brashad Perriman, maybe a guy like Kevin White, someone from 2015 or 2014 that's fallen a little bit in the last 6 months, someone that I can pick up on the cheap, maybe for, Jeremy Hill to get a wide receiver back and a pick, something like that. That's kind of the direction I'll be looking at. I'm going to avoid putting in talent or capital into the tight end position. One, because I have 3, 4, or 5 of them on the roster, so that I'm already using up too much space on tight ends. But also, I've got a lot of guys that, if these develop into a tight end 1, if I could get tight end 1 production from any of these 3, or any combination of these 3 going forward, then acquiring a tight end just has very marginal value, unless it's a guy like Jordan Reed, who I guess is on the short list of guys I'd price check in this offseason. Beyond that, at IDP, there's not much to do up here. DT is not a position that I'll be drafting. DE, again, I will not be drafting a DE almost certainly. I guess if a guy like Frank Clark fell into that fourth round, or a guy like Khalil Mack fell into that fourth round, then sure, I guess I would consider that. But most likely it's going to be a wide receiver or a linebacker. And that linebacker, I think I've got enough capital invested here as well. I've got the LB1 talent, and I've got LB2, LB3 talent, so I can fill out a three-man starting roster pretty simply. And I don't really want to spend more. And then at defensive back, again, this will be the waiver wire will fix this, or at least it will provide me my 2016 starters at the position. Anyway, those are two different teams, two different strategies, two different plans going forward. I think both teams are in a very good situation to make a deep playoff run in 2016, even though both teams are a little bit devoid of 2016 draft capital. This first team just has a second and a fifth round pick. This IDP team only has a second and a fourth round pick. But I think both teams are strong enough at the top and through to the middle and back into the rosters that it doesn't need a ton of draft capital to keep things on the competitive track. I hope you enjoyed watching this. I decided to try a video instead of writing something like this. If you have any questions about the methodology, it's simple. You list all your players, you value what you think, you put what you think their value is, and you rank them 1 through whatever. And you'll see some things very obvious. I mean, Jeremy Hill, how many times was he start worthy this past season? After week 4, how many times would you have felt good starting Jeremy Hill? Compare that to Charles Sims or Deion Lewis. Deion Lewis was an every week RB1 while he was healthy. Charles Sims was always a threat to be an RB2, RB3, RB1, and he was a solid RB2, RB3 as far as average points per game. I think average points per game he was an RB3, but in total points he was an RB2. So you get 3 guys here. 2 of them you were fine starting for most of the season. 1 of them you hated starting for most of the season. And yet Jeremy Hill still holds a lot of dynasty value, so he is highlighted in green. He's a guy that I would like to shop. Meanwhile, you have these 3 guys. None of these 3 had very good seasons this past season, from week 1 through week 16. Some of it was out of their own control. Forsett got injured. That happens. Sean Drone just did not have a team the first half of the season. That happens also. But none of these 3 have values that exceed what they could be producing if they were given an RB1, a lead running back job in 2016. And I think Forsett, most likely, followed by Drone, followed long behind them by Brandon Bolden. All 3 of them could have a lead running back role in the next season. I guess Bolden is the least likely of the 3, and he could easily be a cut. And then you get Tim Hightower. He just came in off the street, did his job. Probably won't have a job next season. He might. He could hold on like a Jonas Gray type, just make a few practice squads, maybe make a splash late in the season again. But I will not be excited to hold him through the off season. So he can be cut. He can be shopped. And Joique Bell was just a waste of a roster spot. I acquired him for a 5th round pick. He's horrible. Cut him. So you see, you have 3 players that are very clearly worse than the rest. You have 5 players here that you wouldn't mind carrying on the roster, and you got 1 here that really sticks out as a guy that you want to be shopping. So that's how I would approach the running back position. Same thing with wide receivers. You got talent at the top, but these guys may not have wide receiver 1 upside. If a player does not have wide receiver 1 upside, and I have 5 legitimate wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 plays on the team, I don't really care to develop these players. I'd rather cash them out for rookie picks or for other talent that may have a chance to break out that's half as much as Albert Wilson. But if I could acquire a guy like DeAndre Smelter, for example, I would trade Albert Wilson and Rashad Green together for DeAndre Smelter. I would trade 3 of these guys 3 for 1 for DeAndre Smelter right now, because I think DeAndre Smelter has wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 upside, and that has a chance to be relevant with this roster. Whereas even if Albert Wilson hits, he's a wide receiver 3, a wide receiver 4, and while that is fantasy relevant in a deep league like this, it's not fantasy relevant to a deep team like this. So that's why I would be looking to shop all 5 of these receivers, and why a guy like Taylor Gabriel is an obvious cut. In fact, I'd probably put him here. He's a pretty obvious cut if roster spots start getting tight. Um, anyway, you just go through it position by position, see where your strengths are, see where your weaknesses are, and see where your capital outweighs its utility to yourself. If you can get, if you can sell a guy, put it in terms of dollars. If employing Jeremy Hill on your team can make you $20, but Jeremy Hill is worth $50, you should sell him. You're wasting that $30 difference by keeping him on your bench when you could be selling him. And in this team, it's going to be hard for me to leverage Jeremy Hill. Therefore, I should sell him. Repeat ad nauseum, or repeat until you're done with your team, and that's it. That works for a deeper team like this. I have a 70-man roster that I'll have to go through and do something very similar toward. And while on the surface it seems a lot more daunting than this, almost 22 more players in this. However, once you get rid of all the players that are on IR and are not going to come back, you get rid of the free agents, you get rid of the players on your team that you don't really want to have going forward, all of a sudden you're down to 40 players or 30 players. And then you can start to figure out, if you have 16 players that are all highlighted in red and they all are valued at any pick, it really doesn't matter which ones you're cutting. Cut whichever ones you feel like. You don't have to stress about it. If you have multiple guys that are yellow and one guy that is red, and you need to cut one guy, just cut the red guy. Don't worry about it. You're playing the numbers here, and you're not always going to make the right decision. Sometimes guys that you cut are going to end up doing really good things. For example, with this team, I had Danny Amendola on my team coming into week 1. I dropped him after, I think, week 4, and he sat on the waiver wire for a couple weeks, and all of a sudden, when the Patriots started losing more guys at receiver, Danny Amendola was picked up, and I was forced to trade to acquire him to have a late season starter. And he was a very important part of my team, but it ended up costing me a lot to have that. Still, shit happens. You can't control that. You just play the numbers, and eventually, hopefully, you'll end up having a good team. So, once again, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, if you'd like me to take a look at one of your teams, it's fun for me. It's a logic puzzle. There's a right answer sometimes. Sometimes there's multiple right answers for what to do with a team, and it's fun to kind of diagnose those. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you this offseason.